The worn dollar bill trembled in 8-year-old Crispin's small fingers as he stood at the edge of the dusty auction grounds, watching grown men bid thousands on magnificent horses that pranced and whinnied in the afternoon sun. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but he clutched that single dollar like it held the power to change everything. Because maybe, just maybe, it did. 3 weeks ago, Crispin's world had crumbled when his grandfather Hollis passed away, leaving behind only debts and a small ranch that the bank was eager to claim. His grandmother Willa had tried to shield him from the harsh reality. But children hear things in the quiet moments between adult conversations. They were losing the ranch. They had nowhere to go. And the old mare Buttercup, who had been Hollis's pride and joy, had been sold just that morning to cover funeral expenses. The auction house buzzed with activity as wealthy ranchers and horse enthusiasts examined the animals up for bid. Crispin had walked 12 miles from his grandmother's ranch, his worn sneakers developing new holes with each step, following a desperate plan that had formed in his mind during sleepless nights. He'd heard the ranch hands talking about horses that sometimes went for cheap at auctions, old ones, injured ones, ones that nobody else wanted. Lot 47, a 12-year-old Appaloosa gelding named Dusty, the auctioneer called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. He's got some age on him, but he's gentle and reliable. Crispin pushed through the crowd of adults, his heart hammering against his ribs. Dusty was a beautiful horse with a spotted coat, but Crispin could see what the others saw, the slight limp in his front leg, the gray around his muzzle that spoke of years past his prime. The bidding started at $500 and quickly climbed to $800 before stalling. "Do I hear 900?" the auctioneer called out. Silence fell over the crowd. Crispin watched as heads shook and people began to lose interest. This was his moment. $1. Crispin's voice cracked as he raised his hand high, the worn bill visible above the sea of cowboy hats. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't cruel, more surprised and amused. The auctioneer paused, his gavel halfway to the block, and looked down at the small boy with dirt-streaked cheeks and hopeful eyes. "Son, did you say $1? "Yes, sir," Crispin replied, his voice stronger now. "It's all I have, but I promise I'll take good care of him." The crowd had gone quiet, sensing something profound in the moment. Rancher Maverick Thornfield, known throughout the county for his prize-winning horses, had been watching the boy since he'd pushed through the crowd. There was something in the child's eyes, a desperation mixed with pure hope that stirred something deep in the weathered cowboy's chest. The auctioneer looked uncertain, glancing between the boy and the crowd. Technically, auctions had minimum bids, but the silence stretched on as everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. That single dollar bill, earned from collecting bottles along the highway for 3 weeks, represented everything Crispin had left in the world and everything he was willing to risk for a chance at hope. "Now hold on there, son." Maverick Thornfield's deep voice cut through the murmur of the crowd as he stepped forward, his weathered boots clicking against the dusty ground. The 60-year-old rancher had built his reputation on shrewd business, deals and an eye for exceptional horses, but something about the boy's desperate courage stirred memories of his own childhood struggles. That there's a fine horse and $1 just won't cover the auction house fees. Crispin's face fell, his shoulders sagging as reality crashed over him like a cold wave. Of course it wouldn't work. Nothing had worked since Grandfather Hollis died. However, Maverick continued, his gray eyes twinkling beneath the brim of his hat, "I was thinking of bidding on that horse myself. Tell you what, boy, what's your name?" "Crispin, sir." "Crispin Holloway." "Well, Crispin Holloway, how about we make ourselves a deal? I'll bid on this horse and you can work for me to earn him, fair and square." The auctioneer, sensing the crowd's investment in the drama unfolding, called out once more, "Do I hear $900? $1,000, Maverick called out firmly, his hand raised. No other bids came. The gavel fell with a decisive crack. "Sold to Maverick Thornfield for $1,000. As the crowd began to disperse, Maverick knelt down to Crispin's eye level. Up close, the boy could see the kindness lines around the rancher's eyes, the gentle way he held himself despite his imposing size. "Now, about that work arrangement," Maverick said. "My ranch is about 15 miles north of here. I could use help with feeding horses, mucking stalls, mending fences. It's honest work, and I'll pay honest wages. You work hard for me all summer, and by September, that horse will be yours. What do you say?" Crispin's mind raced. He thought of Grandmother Willa, probably pacing the kitchen floor and worrying sick about where he'd disappeared to. He thought of the bank notice taped to their front door, giving them 30 days to vacate. But he also thought of Grandfather Hollis's weathered hands teaching him to rope, the way the old man's eyes lit up when he talked about the bond between a boy and his horse. "I accept, Mr. Thornfield," Crispin said, extending his small hand for a shake. "But I need to tell my grandmother where I am. She's probably worried sick." Maverick's expression softened further. "Of course, son. We'll swing by your place first. Where do you live?" "The old Holloway Ranch, about 12 miles south." "But Mr. Thornfield, we're losing it. The bank's taking it away." Understanding dawned in Maverick's eyes. He'd heard whispers around town about old Hollis Holloway's passing and the debts he'd left behind. The community had respected the old rancher, but respect didn't pay bills or save family land. "Well now," Maverick said slowly, "seems like you've got more troubles than just needing a horse. Let's go talk to your grandmother. Sometimes adults can figure out solutions that seem impossible to young folks." As they walked toward Maverick's truck, Dusty was being loaded into a trailer. The horse turned his gentle brown eyes toward Crispin, and for a moment, boy and horse regarded each other with mutual curiosity. Dusty's slight limp was more pronounced as he favored his front leg, but there was intelligence and kindness in his gaze that spoke to something deep in Crispin's heart. "He's perfect," Crispin whispered. "That he is," Maverick agreed. "Dusty's got a lot of good years left in him. Just needs someone to believe in him, give him a chance to prove his worth. Funny how horses and people aren't so different in that regard." The old Holloway Ranch looked smaller and more weathered than Maverick remembered from his occasional drives past it over the years. Paint peeled from the barn walls, fence posts leaned at tired angles, and the house itself seemed to sag under the weight of accumulated sorrows. But as his truck pulled into the gravel driveway, he could see remnants of the pride and care that had once made this place special. Flower beds that someone still tended, a vegetable garden fighting against weeds, windows that sparkled clean, despite everything else falling apart. Willa Holloway emerged from the house before they'd even parked, her silver hair catching the late afternoon sun, and her face a mixture of relief and controlled panic. At 72, she still moved with the purposeful stride of a woman who'd spent her life managing a ranch alongside her husband, but Maverick could see the exhaustion in her shoulders, the way worry had carved deeper lines around her eyes. Crispin. "Holloway, you nearly gave me a heart attack," she called out, but her voice cracked with emotion as she pulled her grandson into a fierce hug. "I've been calling the sheriff, the neighbors, everyone I could think of. Where on earth did you go?" "I'm sorry, Grandma Willa," Crispin mumbled into her shoulder. "I went to the horse auction. I had a plan." Willa looked up at Maverick with curious eyes as he stepped out of his truck. She recognized him, of course. Everyone in the county knew Maverick Thornfield's reputation as a fair but shrewd businessman. "Mrs. Holloway," Maverick said, removing his hat respectfully, "your grandson here showed up at today's auction with $1 and more courage than most grown men I know. We've made ourselves an arrangement, if you're agreeable to it." Over glasses of sweet tea on the front porch, Maverick explained the work agreement while Willa listened with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust easy promises. Crispin sat between them, his eyes darting back and forth as the adults discussed his future. "It's generous of you, Mr. Thornfield," Willa said finally. But I'm not sure it solves our larger problem. Crispin would be away all summer and come September when he earns that horse, we won't have anywhere to keep it. The bank, she gestured toward the notice still taped to the door. They've made their intentions clear. Maverick leaned back in his chair, studying the ranch with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent his life evaluating property. The land was good, rich soil, natural water sources, decent acreage. The buildings needed work, but the bones were solid. Mrs. Holloway, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly does your family owe? Willa's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she met his gaze steadily. Hollis got sick these last few years. Medical bills, missed income when he couldn't work. It all added up. We owe $47,000. Maverick was quiet for a long moment, his weathered fingers drumming against his tea glass. $47,000 wasn't an impossible sum, but it might as well have been $1 million to a widow living on Social Security with a young grandson to raise. I've got a proposition for you both, he said finally. My ranch is successful, but it's getting too big for me to manage alone. I need a foreman I can trust, someone with experience and integrity. Mrs. Holloway, your husband had a reputation as one of the finest horsemen in 3 counties. I appreciate the kind words, but Hollis is gone, Willa said softly. Yes, ma'am, he is. But you worked that ranch beside him for 47 years. You know horses, you know land, and you know how to manage people. What if you came to work for me as my operations manager? It's a position that would pay well enough to handle your debt payments and provide a good living. Crispin's eyes widened. You mean we wouldn't lose the ranch? Well now, Maverick said with a slight smile. That depends on whether your grandmother is interested in a business partnership. You see, I've been thinking about expanding my operation, and this property would make an excellent satellite location. If Mrs. Holloway agrees to manage operations here and oversee the rehabilitation of the buildings, I'd be willing to purchase the debt from the bank and work out a long-term arrangement that benefits everyone. By the time the first heat waves of July shimmered across the pastures, both boy and horse had found their rhythm in their new life at Maverick's Windstone Ranch. Crispin rose with the sun each morning, his small hands growing calloused from pitchfork handles and rope work, his thin frame gradually filling out from Maverick's cook Henrietta's hearty meals and the constant physical activity of ranch life. Dusty had been assigned to a rehabilitation paddock near the main barn, where the ranch veterinarian, Dr. Coral Brightwater, worked with him daily to strengthen his injured leg. The Appaloosa's limp had improved significantly with proper care, anti-inflammatory medication, and carefully structured exercise. More importantly, the defeat that had clouded his eyes at the auction had been replaced by alert interest in his surroundings and growing affection for the boy who visited him every morning before chores. He's responding beautifully to the treatment, Dr. Brightwater told Crispin as they watched Dusty navigate a series of ground poles designed to improve his gait. The injury was old, probably never treated properly when it first happened, but with time and patience, he'll be sound enough for light riding. Crispin beamed with pride as Dusty successfully completed the exercise, the horse's steps more even and confident than they'd been just weeks before. Grandfather Hollis always said that horses know when you believe in them. Meanwhile, Willa had thrown herself into her new role with the determination of a woman given an unexpected second chance. She arrived at the Holloway Ranch each morning to oversee the renovation crews that Maverick had hired, her keen eye catching details that might have been overlooked. The old barn was getting a new roof, the fence lines were being repaired with sturdy cedar posts, and the house itself was slowly returning to its former dignity with fresh paint and careful repairs. Your grandmother's got a gift for this work, Maverick told Crispin one evening as they watched Willa direct the installation of new pasture gates. She sees what needs doing and gets it done right the first time. That's rarer than you might think. The partnership between Maverick and Willa had developed into something neither had expected. A genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared love for the land. Willa brought 4 decades of practical ranch management experience, while Maverick provided the resources and business connections to turn good ideas into reality. But it was the growing bond between Crispin and Dusty that truly captured everyone's attention. The boy had a natural way with horses that reminded Maverick of himself at that age. Patient, intuitive, willing to work for trust rather than demand obedience. Every evening after his chores were complete, Crispin would spend time with Dusty, sometimes just sitting in the paddock, reading aloud from adventure books, other times working on basic ground training exercises that Dr. Brightwater had taught him. "That horse follows him around like a dog," Henrietta observed one afternoon, as she and Maverick watched Crispin lead Dusty through a series of backing and turning exercises. "Never seen anything quite like it." "It's special, all right," Maverick agreed. "That boy's got his grandfather's gift with horses, no doubt about it." By August, Dusty was sound enough for Crispin to begin riding lessons under Maverick's careful supervision. The first time Crispin settled into the saddle on Dusty's back, both horse and rider seemed to find something they'd been searching for, without knowing it. Dusty's ears pricked forward with interest rather than anxiety, and Crispin's natural seat and gentle hands communicated clearly with his mount. "Easy does it," Maverick coached from the center of the round pen. "Let him find his own pace, don't rush him." But there was no rushing needed. Horse and boy moved together with an instinctive harmony that spoke of deeper connection than mere training could achieve. As summer drew toward its close, Crispin had progressed from simple walk-trot exercises to confident trail rides around the ranch, always with Dusty's steady, willing partnership beneath him. The transformation wasn't just in horse and rider, it was in the entire family. Willa had found new purpose and pride in her work. Crispin had discovered confidence and capability he never knew he possessed, and the old Holloway ranch was slowly returning to its former beauty. September arrived with golden mornings and the promise of change in the crisp air. The summer that had begun with desperation and a single-dollar bill was drawing to a close, and Crispin could hardly recognize the confident young horseman he'd become. His shoulders were broader, his hands steady and sure, and when he walked into the barn each morning, horses turned toward him with the recognition reserved for someone they trusted completely. "Well, son," Maverick said on the first Saturday of September, finding Crispin grooming Dusty in the barn aisle, "I believe we had ourselves a bargain. You've worked every day this summer, never complained, never shirked your duties. That horse, there is yours fair and square." Crispin's hands stilled on the curry comb, and for a moment he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. All summer he'd worked toward this moment, but now that it was here, it felt almost too good to be real. "You mean it, Mr. Thornfield? Dusty's really mine?" "As sure as sunrise, boy. Got the papers right here." Maverick pulled a manila envelope from his jacket pocket. "Transfer of ownership. Signed and notarized. Dusty belongs to Crispin Holloway. As of today." But Crispin's joy was tempered by a growing concern that had been building in his heart for weeks. "Mr. Thornfield, what happens now? Summer's over, school starts Monday, and I know you don't need me around the ranch as much with the busy season ending." Maverick's weathered face creased into a smile. "Well now, that's something we need to discuss. Walk with me." They strolled toward the renovated Holloway Ranch, Dusty following along loose-legged beside Crispin like an oversized dog. The old place had been transformed over the summer. Fresh white paint gleamed on the house and barn, new fencing stretched in straight lines across rolling pastures, and a sense of pride and purpose had returned to every corner of the property. "Your grandmother and I have been talking," Maverick continued, "and we've come to some conclusions. First, that woman is the finest ranch manager I've ever worked with. She's turned the satellite operation here into something special, and I'd be a fool to let her go." They paused at the front gate, where a new sign read, "Holloway Windstone Ranch Partnership," in elegant script. "Second," Maverick went on, "you've got a natural gift with horses that shouldn't be wasted. I'm proposing a different kind of arrangement. Now, year-round work, after school and weekends during the school year, full-time in summers. You'll learn every aspect of ranch management, breeding, training, business operations, the works. By the time you graduate high school, you'll be ready to take on real responsibility. Crispin's heart hammered with excitement, but he forced himself to ask the practical question. What about Grandma Willa? What about our home? That's the beautiful part of this arrangement, Maverick said, his eyes twinkling. The debt's been transferred to a long-term business loan that your grandmother's salary more than covers. This ranch remains in your family, but it's also part of a larger operation that can support everyone properly, best of both worlds. Willa emerged from the house then, having heard their voices from the kitchen where she'd been preparing one of her famous apple pies. Her face glowed with contentment in a way Crispin hadn't seen since before Grandfather Hollis got sick. Did you tell him about the surprise? She asked Maverick, unable to contain her own excitement. What surprise? Crispin looked between the two adults, sensing something wonderful in the air. Maverick gestured toward the newly renovated barn. Go take a look in the last stall on the right. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Crispin led Dusty toward the barn. The familiar smells of fresh hay and horse greeted him, but there was something else. A familiar nicker that made his heart skip a beat. Buttercup? He whispered, hardly daring to believe. There in the clean, spacious stall stood the old mare that had been his grandfather's favorite, the one they'd been forced to sell to pay funeral expenses. Her coat gleamed with good care, her eyes bright and alert, and when she saw Crispin, she whinnied with unmistakable joy. But how? I tracked down the fellow who bought her, Maverick explained, his voice gruff with emotion. Turns out he was just looking for a gentle horse for his grandchildren to learn on. When I explained the situation and offered to buy her back plus a fair profit, he was happy to make the deal. Figured she belonged here with family. Crispin felt tears streaming down his cheeks as he opened the stall door and wrapped his arms around Buttercup's familiar neck. The mare nuzzled him gently, and even Dusty seemed to sense the significance of the moment, stretching his head over the stall door to investigate his new pasture mate. 5 years later, on a crisp October morning that painted the ranch in shades of gold and crimson, 13-year-old Crispin Holloway stood at the edge of the same auction grounds where his desperate plan had begun. But this time, he wasn't clutching a single worn dollar bill. He was leading a magnificent young quarter-horse colt that he'd trained himself, preparing to enter it in the youth division of the regional horse show. Dusty, now 17 and distinguished, with more gray around his muzzle, stood tied to the trailer, serving as the calm, steady influence that helped settle the younger horses. His slight limp had never fully disappeared, but it didn't prevent him from being exactly what Crispin needed, a trusted partner, teacher, and friend who had shown a desperate boy that sometimes the most broken-looking things hold the greatest potential for beauty. Nervous? Maverick asked, adjusting his tie as he prepared to serve as one of the show judges. At 65, he moved with the careful dignity of a man who'd lived well and accomplished much, but his eyes still held the same kindness that had recognized something special in a desperate child 5 years before. A little, Crispin admitted, running his hand along the colt's glossy neck. But Storm's ready. We've been working toward this for months. Willa approached, carrying a thermos of coffee for Maverick and beaming with grandmotherly pride. At 77, she remained sharp and energetic, though she'd begun delegating more of the daily ranch operations to Crispin, as he demonstrated increasing maturity and capability. Your grandfather would be so proud, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just of your riding, but of the young man you've become. The Holloway-Winstone Ranch partnership had flourished beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What had begun as a desperate arrangement to save a family from losing everything had evolved into one of the region's most respected horse breeding and training operations. Crispin had developed a reputation for his ability to work with difficult or traumatized horses, a skill that seemed to flow naturally from his own experience of being given a second chance when he needed it most. "There's something I want to show you before the competition starts," Maverick said, leading them toward a section of the auction grounds that had been set up for a special presentation. A small crowd had gathered around a display featuring photographs and a banner that read, "Second Chances, a Community Initiative." At the center of the display was a photo of 8-year-old Crispin at the original auction, his hand raised high with that single-dollar bill. "We've been working with the auction house and several local ranchers," Maverick explained, "to establish a program for young people who show genuine commitment to horses but lack the resources to pursue their dreams. It's called the Holloway Second Chance Fund." Crispin stared at the display, overwhelmed by the realization that his own story had inspired something larger than himself. The fund would provide opportunities for other children to earn horses through work and dedication, just as he had done. Every year, one young person will have the chance to bid a single dollar on a horse that needs them as much as they need it, Willa added. "The fund will cover the difference and provide support for training and care." As the morning progressed and Crispin prepared for his competition, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The desperate 8-year-old who had walked 12 miles with his last dollar had been transformed not just by the horse he'd earned, but by the community of people who had seen potential in his determination and had invested in his future. When his name was called for the youth division competition, Crispin mounted Storm with quiet confidence. As they entered the show ring, he caught sight of a small boy at the rail, watching with wide, eager eyes that reminded him of his own desperate hope 5 years before. After completing a flawless performance that earned them first place, Crispin rode over to where the boy stood with what appeared to be his grandfather. "You did real good out there," the boy said shyly. "Think I could ever ride like that?" Crispin dismounted and smiled, remembering another boy who had once believed that impossible dreams could come true with enough determination and the right. "Kinda help. What's your name, son?" "Phoenix Martinez. That's my grandpa, Joaquin." "Well, Phoenix Martinez, let me tell you something important," Crispin said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned that hope and hard work could overcome even the darkest circumstances. "Sometimes the best things in life start with just $1 and the courage to believe in yourself. If you're willing to work for your dreams, there are people who will help you achieve them." As the sun set over the auction grounds that evening, Crispin loaded Storm and Dusty into the trailer for the trip home. The blue ribbon from his victory fluttered from the trailer window, but the real treasure was the knowledge that his story would continue to inspire others to take their own brave first steps toward hope. That night, as he settled Dusty and Storm in their stalls at the ranch, Crispin reflected on how a single moment of desperate courage had transformed not just his own life, but had created ripples of possibility that would continue long after he was gone. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest gestures, like a boy's faith that $1 could buy a miracle, and the adults who chose to believe in that faith and help make it real. The old Holloway Ranch slept peacefully under a canopy of stars, home to a family that had learned that hope, once kindled, burns eternal and spreads to light the way for others walking in darkness toward their own dreams of morning.